This is Isaac Morehouse. Welcome to the podcast where we discuss education, entrepreneurship, big ideas, how to put them into practice in the real world, and above all, how to live free. I am delighted today to be joined by Bryan Caplan, who is an economist at George Mason University. He blogs on Econlog, which is one of the few blogs that I actually visit directly on a regular basis instead of just waiting to see what comes into my newsfeed. Phenomenal blog. And he is the author of The Myth of the Rational Voter and Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids. And he is also the author of the forthcoming book, The Case Against Education. Bryan Caplan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Isaac.
So I definitely want to get into three areas of your research in particular: education, procreation, and immigration, because I love alliteration. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about you. We want to explore the life of Bryan, as it were. So
movies?
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you from, and when did you become interested in economics?
I am from Northridge, California, which is in the San Fernando Valley, 30 minutes north of Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles. And I first got interested in economics in my senior year of high school.
What was it that made you attracted to economics in high school? Not many people have economics classes in high school. Was it something else?
I actually did have an economics class in high school, though it was terrible. Although I actually got the teacher to let me take over the class one day and told them everything I thought. But I mean, the actual the chain of events is I had a friend who told me I should really read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, and I did. And I got very excited about it, but then I was wondering, well, is any of this stuff actually doable, or is this just a pipe dream? And that's when I started looking around for economics to read, and then found at least some people saying, no, it is doable, it's not a pipe dream. So at least there were some smart people who thought that free markets were the way to go. And that's really where I started.
And did you know from that point on that this is what you wanted to do sort of professionally, or was it just an intellectual interest? When did you kind of merge your interest in economics with, hey, this is what I want to make a career out of?
Yeah, so I've wanted to be a professor since junior high. Although at the time I wanted to be an English professor, actually. I was really interested in literature. And again, I had no idea about what the academic labor market was like or anything else. I just said, well, this is interesting, so I'll go and do this. And then once I started reading more widely in my senior year, that's when I mostly lost interest in literature as a field that I would do professionally and got interested in economics. And actually, for a long time, I was thinking that I was more likely I would get a PhD in philosophy and try to be a philosophy professor. And then when I was undergraduate at Berkeley, sort of actually in my junior year, senior year, that's when I was weighing which one do I really want to do, and decided to go with economics, and I've been really happy how it worked out for me.
And where did you do your undergrad and then your PhD?
Yeah, so I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley, and I got my PhD at Princeton.
Okay. And did you focus on a specific area of economics when you were getting your PhD? I know now you cover such a wide variety of things, but... Yeah.
I focused on the most boring stuff that I've ever done. So which maybe isn't that bad, but I mean, I did a few. My dissertation had two pieces on the economics of state and local government, and then a piece on macroeconomics and war. Huh. So that was that was my dissertation. That was the kind of stuff I was working on then. Basically, I was just trying to do some standard stuff in order to get my dissertation done and get my PhD, and then work on the stuff that really interested me more.
And now you seem to be in a place, and correct me if I'm wrong, where you kind of freely explore a really wide variety of topics. And I would even say you are part economist, part philosopher. I mean, you're kind of willing to go outside of sort of very strict bounds of sort of pure economics. Is that something that you just had to kind of earn the freedom to do personally and professionally?
Yeah, well, there's two things. So, of course, one of them is once you have tenure, which I do, then you really are free to do whatever you want. The main constraint is just other people look at you funny, and you might not get a raise if you're doing weird stuff, but that's not such a bad constraint if your salary's already okay. So, I mean, tenure was really the key. But then, secondarily, so being at George Mason, where I have very supportive peers, where people like people are interested in what I'm in the stuff that interests me. So, I've got that going for me too. And then finally, actually, the rise of blogging has made a big difference too, because blogging really makes it easy to dabble in something and then get a little more interested and get a little more interested and then finally decide you really want to do serious work on it. Whereas as long as you're only writing academic papers, it's just much harder to get your feet wet. So really, blogging has been a big deal for me just in terms of making me realize that there's a market for smaller ideas and see where they go. And usually it's just like one short piece and that's it. But sometimes it expands and takes on a life of its own.
That makes me think of something that I've wondered for quite a while. It seems to me, at least sort of from the outside looking in, that economists were much more likely to be early adopters of blogging and much more engaged in blogging than academics in other fields. Now, I don't know if that's true. It appears to be true from where I'm sitting. Do you have any, if it is true, do you have any theories on why that might be?
Yeah, so I do think that it is true. So, of course, you have to adjust for economics being just a larger subject with more faculty, more professors, and more practitioners than say, sociologists or whatever. So there's that. But yeah, it does seem like there's a higher percentage of economists who blog, and I think it's because you've got a small but still noticeable percentage of economists who didn't really get into economics to do the work that they're doing. So like the kind of work that academic economists do is writing journal articles for other professors, and I'd say 5 or 10% of economists really got into it because they were fascinated by the world. And then this is the way they earn their living. And then blogging gives them a chance to use these tools to cover a broader range of subjects. And I think a lot of other areas, there isn't the same element of I entered it because I was really curious about the world. It's more of just a pure professional track. There's more economists who are there because it's a field that lets them do what they want. Whereas most other fields, everyone there is there because they want to be part of that discipline narrowly defined.
Now, how often do you blog? Do you have like a regular schedule you stick to, or is it just whenever you're inspired?
Yeah, so I usually try to blog 5 days a week. So every weekday. I've got 4 kids, so I don't blog much on the weekends. In the past, when it was more based on inspiration. Now especially so the last 2 years, I've been focusing really intently on finishing The Case Against Education, my book, and so I've just been trying to cut out all extraneous stuff so I can get done. And that's probably cut down on the blogging a bit, but still, like 5 pieces a week is pretty much what I shoot for.
When you sit down, do you always have something that you're going to write already, or do you have to sometimes say, okay, what am I going to blog about today? And if so, how do you find inspiration?
So the biggest inspiration is lunch. So I get lunch with the other professors. They're almost all bloggers. So a lot of times, whatever we're arguing about at lunch is what gets blogged. In terms of ideas, so. For me, it's rather than I sit down and I try to figure out what I want to write. It's more often that I have lots of ideas and I write them down and then I blog them when I have the time. So I have like 100 different posts that I just write a title and maybe a few words to remind myself what I'm supposed to say.
So you keep a bunch of drafts with a rough. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
A draft equals a title and a few words.
Yep.
So and that's sort of the way that I start working on projects is I just go and I write down a title somewhere and then it's there and I can come back to it eventually. There's a lot of things that have been sort of sitting there for years and I've never gotten around to doing them. A lot of times the stuff that I don't do is the stuff where it's very meaty and I feel like it's a lot of work and I just don't have the energy that day to really do it. And then sort of when I'm a quieter time, when I've reached a good breaking point in other work, that's when I will go and write up the things that I've been meaning to do for years, but haven't gotten around to it. So what really doesn't matter very much for me is current events. I try to not worry about current events. In general, I find them silly circuses, and I just don't care. The only thing, sometimes I will be negatively inspired by a current event, where I'll write a piece saying how this current event is actually another further evidence that these current events are relevant and don't really prove what you think they prove. But I don't know, on Twitter, I've been arguing with a guy at Heritage named Mike Gonzalez, and he just tweeted saying, latest events in Missouri prove Brian's wrong on this. And I'm like, 40 kids in one college prove I'm wrong about something? How could that be?
Well, that's one of the
grain of sand on the sea. How could that mean anything?
Well, so that's one of the things that I've really loved about your work. So I'm gonna thank you for a few things for a minute here, if you'll indulge me. So
absolutely.
Yes, you can just bask in it for a minute. So early on, your work on public choice theory and sort of the incentive problems baked into democracy were very instrumental in not only my own understanding of the world, but changing my my own kind of life direction in terms of helping me come to the conclusion that politics is a not a effective way to try to make the world a freer, better place. And then later, your work on education, especially the signaling theory of education, which we'll talk about, was actually very instrumental in eventually leading me to launch my company, Praxis. But more than both of those, there's two little blog posts you did that I come back to these probably once a year. They're so valuable to me, and they really embody kind of what I like about your outlook. They're called My Beautiful Bubble and Make Your Own Bubble in 10 Easy Steps. And they're you talking about, and I'm going to quote briefly from one of them, talking about how you approach life and how you're not ashamed of the fact that you live in a bubble. In fact, you deliberately have constructed it. And the quote here is from the first one, My Beautiful Bubble. I pursue the strategy that actually works, making my small corner of the world beautiful in my eyes. I import almost everything I consume from the outside world. Indeed, I frequently leave the security of my bubble to walk the earth, but I do so as a tourist. I hunt for the best that, quote, my society has to offer. I partake, then I go back to my bubble and tell myself, America is a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. I absolutely love that. And I find it really fascinating that you're sort of so comfortable with the fact that, look, you want to enjoy your life and not feel guilt over that. Was this like a philosophy that took you a long time to come to?
It was gradual. The sort of the reason why that post got written was Charles Murray had his let's see, the title is escaping me for a minute. He's the one with Fishtown and the other place. Let's see, White America's in the title. I remember what it is.
Was it Coming Apart?
Yeah, coming apart.
Okay.
It's Coming Apart. Yeah. So anyway, like sort of a tie into that book is he had this test where you can go and find out how much of a bubble you're in, and he was commenting on how all these elites that he knows have these very low scores, indicating they really have very little contact with American society. No one knows what's going on, and he said, and they're always so surprised. They're always amazed. What? I'm an outsider? I mean, I'm just a regular old PhD American guy. Like, of course, I'm just middle America here. And then they find out, no, you're actually really weird. You have very little familiarity with what normal Americans have. And I actually, on the one hand, when I looked at this test, I knew my score was actually low, even by Murray standards. But the other thing is I expected my score to be extremely low. It was no surprise to me because I've always felt like an outsider from a very early age. I never really felt well integrated into American society. From the earliest point, I always felt like I was just a different person doing my own thing. So that was sort of key. And actually then the idea of writing this post, the pro bubble post, I put down a title, but then I sat on it for maybe like 6 months or so, because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to get everyone angry at me, and then finally say, I don't know what, I don't know why they get so angry, and so I finally then once I felt comfortable doing it, went in and wrote it out. So I mean, a lot of it does reflect attitudes I've had for really as long as I can remember, but Charles Murray's lamenting of the bubble that people live in really was the spur that got me to actually pull all the ideas together and write it up.
Did people get angry in response?
Yeah, plenty did.
And okay, so I wanted to ask you.
You can look at the comments and just how freaking out people were. But,
well, you have a really engaged comment section on that blog, and for the most part, compared to, let's say, the comments on a YouTube video or something, fairly sophisticated and some pretty good stuff. What is your personal? Do you have like a policy regarding comments? Do you go and read them all? Do you respond to them? Do you not read them? How do you deal with them?
Yeah, so, I mean, in general, I just try to focus on writing more pieces. I mean, I figure that if I write another piece, it could be read by 10,000 people, whereas if I respond to comments, it'll be read by maybe 100 people.
Yep.
So, mostly I see the comments as a place for the readers to talk amongst themselves. So, every now and then there'll be a comment that stands out, and then I'll actually blog something based upon it. There is a lot of just extreme anger in the comments, which I don't see any. I don't really see it as so much intellectual as just the personal problems of people taking print form, so There's so many people who are angry, and really they see the world of ideas as being the source of their anger, whereas it would be amazing if it weren't really the reverse direction of causation, and they're angry people, so they seek out things that will upset them.
So does it ever wear you down? Does it ever get to you? I mean, you write on and speak on some pretty radical things that engender a lot of less than kind responses. Does it ever get to you, even though it's easy to sort of intellectually say, yes, these people clearly have some issues, or people are trolling or whatever, I've got more important things to do, but you're human too. Does it get to you at times?
If I was reading everything very carefully, then it probably would be discouraging. Or again, here's the thing for me: it's very hard for me to read a substantive criticism and not respond to it.
Yeah.
So either I need to have the time to respond, or I just put it off. Although the stuff that really gets under my skin, it's not really random comments. It's mostly people that I think ought to know better saying something that I think they actually know is wrong. So actually, it's disagreements with my close friends that actually I lose the most sleep over.
Huh.
Because and in a way, you could say, well, like I feel like they ought to agree with me and they don't, and then it's like, how can that possibly be? He's really smart. I can't just say that he's dumb. I can't just say he doesn't know what he's talking about. What's going on here? And yeah, so when I do lose sleep, which at my age is actually pretty rare now, but maybe I probably lose like 4 nights of sleep per year. 4 nights a year where I actually just don't sleep at all because there's something that's intellectually bugging me so much.
When was the last time that happened?
Let's see, actually, after the debate I just had with Garrett Jones, I couldn't fall asleep till 4 a.m, so that wasn't quite losing a full night of sleep.
What was the debate about?
That was a debate on immigration that I just did on Tuesday nights.
Okay, all right, we'll have to get a link up to that. What made you lose sleep over it?
Just in my mind, going over all the things that I said or didn't say, and the things, and like thinking of replies to things that I didn't think of replies to, and just psychoanalyzing what's really going on here. What's actually driving this disagreement? How can this be? So
that's what I've always found interesting. So, I wholly embrace this idea of building your own bubble, and that's been a very freeing outlook for me to, for example, not follow the news at all, and to kind of tune out things that just make me less happy. But for me, that also manifests in I don't read the comment section, and I hate debate. I don't like debate as a format because I feel like most people that are doing it and that are observing it are there more just for sort of, my side is better than for like I have a hard time. You seem to embrace that. You are open to debate. You engage this stuff more while still trying to maintain this idea of only doing things that sort of add to your life. Do you enjoy debate?
So 50-50. So there's some kinds of debate where it's very confrontational, and then I have to steel myself to do it. While I'm doing it, I'm having a great time. But probably almost certainly actually the most hostile audience I ever went before. I just spoke for the Writers' Workshop, which is sort of an umbrella group of anti-immigration groups, and I was brought in as being really a walking caricature of someone who actually does favor open borders. So everyone there besides me was really almost everyone very anti-immigration. There are a few people who had a more nuanced view, but still pretty critical. And then I'm brought in to be the one person that says that water runs uphill and they're wrong. I'm not going to say that I enjoyed the time of actually approach of going there. But again, once I actually had time to speak, I always enjoy that. That's just a lot of fun for me. For me, debate it's a very big part of just keeping yourself honest. And there is the danger of the bubble that you just shut yourself off to reality, and I don't want to do that. I might be happier, but I just think that's not a worthy way of living. So when I do go and and have intellectual confrontation, I want it to be something that seems fruitful to me, and where I'm really where at least I'm either learning or I'm learning that there isn't very much to learn from someone. So
you want to go out and visit the outer world to either discover that your bubble should expand, or to remind yourself why you created it in the first. So would you describe yourself? You said that you've always been kind of an outsider. Would you describe yourself? Would you say that you're eccentric?
Yeah, I'm eccentric. I'm not so eccentric that I was unable to finish a PhD.
Okay. So you gotta tell me. There's legends about your eccentricity, Brian. You gotta tell me this is true. So right. I've heard these rumors that at seminars, like after a lecture or something, you'll be out in the hallway and a student will come up and ask you a question, And supposedly you will say something like, how long is this going to be? And if it's longer than a few minutes, you'll go get a chair and a cushion and sit down. And supposedly you describe this as to the student, look, I'm not trying to be rude. I've just calculated that the social cost of me doing this and appearing weird is lower than the physical cost of the discomfort I'll endure from standing here.
I might have put it that way when I was younger, but I definitely do that. I mean, the reason's pretty simple. Actually, about 10 years ago, I got both horrible tailbone pain and severe plantar fasciitis, where your feet hurt to stand. And I mean, I dealt with that pain for about a year or two, and finally, I went to a lot of doctors and things like that, and nothing really helped. But finally, I just experimented with lifestyle changes in order to stop doing the things that aggravated the pain. And after a couple of years, I've managed to 90% cure my problem, but I never want to have the problem again.
Wow.
Problems. So
well,
I get the cushion because I don't want the tailbone pain, and I sit because I don't want the foot pain.
Well, and I there's something about that I love. I mean, first of all, that sort of cost benefit analysis is very much like an economist, but just the awareness of, look, there's no universal one thing is rude and one thing's not. There's costs and benefits to everything, and you have to decide what's worth it to you. Again, it's this idea of creating the type of life that you want to live for yourself, even in terms of, okay, people might think I'm weird if I write on this topic or if I behave this way in public. And the ability to just know what you want and go with it is something that I think is very commendable.
So nowadays I think I'm much more likely just to say, would you mind terribly if I went and got a chair?
Yeah.
Rather than explaining exactly what's going on. So, I think people, makes people a lot more comfortable. So, you might remember a piece that I did on how I raised my social intelligence. So, as I gotten older, I realized that often less is more, and you don't even need to explain why you're doing something eccentric. If you just say, would you mind terribly? No. All right, thanks. I'll be right back. And then you do it.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can get if you just ask kindly.
Yeah. Yes. This is the great rule of fundraising. Why do people give money? Because they're asked. And it generalizes. Why do people do anything for anyone? Well, because they're asked.
That is absolutely true. Well, let me ask you about. So you blog quite a bit, and you've written. I would consider both of your books that you've published so far to be popular books, as in accessible to lay people, not purely, they're not published by an academic press that's charging $200 for them, and they're very accessible.
The first book is by Princeton, but they only charge like $30. So,
yeah, and it's a very much, it was a well-read book, well-received broadly. Do you ever feel a tension as an academic that, oh, you shouldn't be out there blogging and doing Twitter, or you should be doing more academic journal-y stuff? How do you make that decision of what to focus on?
Yeah, so I never feel that. So with the books, I always try to write something that will work at multiple levels. So I always, whenever I do a book, I want it so that active researchers in the field, at minimum, feel that it's competent, but also learn something. But then also that intelligent laymen can understand it and learn something from it too. So so essentially, I want to write things where good undergraduates can understand it, but experts also feel like there's some added value, and it's not just re-explaining stuff that's already known.
Do you still write papers for academic journals at all?
Yeah, so I co-author papers with students for academic journals, but no longer as much payoff for me. I just do it to help the students out mostly. So yeah, and again, in terms of academic journal articles, I did publish a bunch of those when I was trying to get tenure. But again, honestly, the typical number of readers for an academic journal article is just so low. You just you reach so few people.
Yeah.
And again, I wouldn't want to do a pure popular book. I don't want to be like an Ann Coulter or someone like that, writing something that just is demagoguery, stoking the masses.
So you want to bring some research to the table.
Yeah. So I want to write something that works at multiple levels, that's readable and important and an important topic, and can be understood by smart people everywhere, but also experts in the field say this has been done in a high quality way, and and they learn something from it too. And just the number of readers that you can get from books is just so much greater. And then furthermore, you can just do a much more satisfying product when you do a book. Journal articles, you're so circumscribed to make one small point that it's what Marx would call it's alienated labor. Like you're doing something that isn't really the way you want to do it just to please the market. And when you do a book, you're still pleasing a market, but the strictures are just so relaxed.
So do you think that more academics should sort of look that way, or I guess, do you think that the academic publishing kind of industry or institution is flawed and needs to be improved in some way?
Yeah. So my honest view is that most academics should just find another line of work. Most academics, they're terrible teachers, and the research is really boring. And I don't think that they have anything more interesting they want to talk about. I think they're just boring people. So yeah, that's my grim, honest assessment. Out of people who can do better, and there's plenty of people who can do better. Yeah, I think that they put too much energy into doing journal articles and too little into addressing more important topics in book format. Of course, you can imagine a world where journals are just very different from they are now.
Yeah.
But the book is it's just it's a nice product. It's one where where again, like, the whole idea of it is to try to reach a broader audience. And so I also have a post called something like steps to writing worthy nonfiction, where a big part of it is choose an important topic, don't just preach to the choir. And again, so much academic work deliberately goes against everything I'm advising, where they choose a topic that is very important to 3 people in the world. and I have heard the defense, it's only 3 people, but the 3 really important people. Once in a long while that happens, but usually they're not 3 important people. They're just 3 other boring people.
Well, and those 3 important people are not, prohibited from reading the book either.
Right.
So what is your process? So this is your 3rd book you're working on. What is your process for writing a book, and how does that differ from, your daily blog posts? You can sit down, you've got a bunch of ideas in the queue, you can write them up, minimal editing probably, you can go back and fix them if you want to. How does writing a book differ? Is it stressful for you? Is it fun? Would you rather be teaching? I mean, what is it like?
Yeah. So especially this last book, I just finally finished the first draft. It's taken me 4 years, and it's been laborious. It's felt like work because it's just such a marathon. The way that I normally start writing a book is there's got to be some big idea or big thing that people think that just seems totally wrong to me. All right. So there has to be some popular view, and it's got to have some plausibility intellectually, but my ultimate judgment has to be this is just totally wrong. It's just so wrong-headed, and that's generally where I start. Is the world is wrong, and then of course it's easy to say that, but then to actually do the detective work and see, well, can I actually back this up? So for my first book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, that was much more within the area of my training, and so I didn't need to do. I did try to broaden my horizons and read widely, but it wasn't that big of a stretch. But for my kids' book, and especially for this recent book, my next step is to just try to read everything relevant that any semi credible person has said. Right, which is why it's taken 4 years, because there's so much written on education, especially. But I think that if you're an economist and you only read what economists say about a subject, then you suck. That's not the way that you learn about the world, by finding out what people like you or in your field think about it. You need to find out what does everybody think about this?
So what percentage of this 4 years, what percentage of that was consuming ideas from others versus what percentage was actually you writing out your own ideas?
I think that it's at least 18 months out of those 2 years, and probably actually 2 full years was reading.
Wow. So
and again, usually what I actually did is I had a 9-month period at the beginning where I just read really widely and just economics, education research, educational psychology, sociology. So tried to just read really widely and sort of get a broad idea of what's going on. And again, and during that period, the sort of the main corrections to what am I not understanding well? Where am I wrong? What can I fix? And then when I'm actually ready to write the book, or that's where when I'm just about ready to write a section, that's when I'll go and reread all the stuff that I've read before. And when I'm right before I'm ready to read, that's when I go and then try to read everything I can. And then basically immediately before I write a section, I try to just read everything and have it all in front of me and be as fresh in my mind as possible. And then when I write, I try to write when I'm at my lifetime peak of knowledge of that subject, knowing I'm going to forget 75% of it pretty soon. But at least there was a moment when I was at my lifetime peak of knowledge on that subject.
So you can say, I am not an expert on this, but at the time I wrote that, I was, right?
Yeah, the time I wrote it, at least I had done the best that I really could think of myself as doing.
When you write, do you write for hours at a time?
Yeah, so normally I just sit in front of once I'm ready to write, then I will just sit in front of the screen and Like especially for this book, with everything that I've read right around me, because a lot of times I'm ready to write a sentence and then I'm like, wait, so let me just double check with everything that I've read that sentence is accurate. So there's very big difference between trying to accurately summarize what other people know versus like where you're pouring out like your general perspective on things. That's a lot easier for me.
Yeah.
I mean, the easiest thing for me to write of all are dialogues.
Yep.
Dialogues to me, where I just break up an imaginary conversation about a subject, that to me is the easiest thing, and that just writes itself. Whereas summarizing, right, what is the state of the art on ability, bias, and education? That's where it's a very grueling process, where every sentence, like, can I say that? Is that a fair and responsible sentence?
Yeah, doing justice to somebody else's work is very, very hard, and I think that's the part that will sort of give your book that academic credibility, and not just be, like you said, pure pop. So, okay, so now that we have sort of established your humanity, you're a normal, honest, decent guy, let's talk about some of your more controversial ideas. Well, first, what would you say? What would you say is the most radical thing that you believe?
So most radical in terms of upsetting people the most, or like really the biggest change from the status quo, is open borders. So I think that immigration restrictions are morally wrong and economically destructive. Not that they've driven us into poverty, but they have prevented the world from being vastly richer and better place than it is. I think that the 19th century American open borders approach was the height of philosophical, ethical, and economic wisdom. Cultural wisdom, every other kind of wisdom, and of course the entire world has greatly fallen away from that. And I say this has been a tragic error, which has immiserated the world relative to what it would have been.
Well, and I have noticed, and I agree with you that probably of your beliefs and certainly of mine as well, the one that causes the most ire among people is anything related to open borders or even just easing immigration restrictions in any way.
Right.
And I want to know your thoughts on why that is. Has that always been the case? Is that a built-in function of human nature to be totally scared of immigrants and outsiders? Or is there something about the current political, cultural dynamic that makes people so hostile on this issue?
Yeah, so ultimately I think that it's very hardwired. So in my first book, I talk about anti-foreign bias. There's a great piece by an economist named Paul Rubin trying to give an evolutionary basis for it. And again, it's a pretty simple story that when human beings were cavemen, xenophobia was very sensible, because when another tribe shows up and you're just hunter-gatherers, you are competing for fixed pie resources, and of course, it may not just be that they're hunting your deer, but that they're going to slip into your camp before dawn and murder all the men and take all the women as slaves. This really did happen throughout much of human history. So we've evolved to have a paranoia about foreigners, which in its time made some sense, but in the modern world is just completely dysfunctional and has nothing to do with the way the modern economy and societies work generally. And we've carried it into the modern period. Now, of course, the degree of anti-foreign bias does vary. It varies between countries, varies over time. Actually, it seems to me we're probably in an unprecedentedly low level of anti-foreign bias right now. So the U.S. is nearing an all-time high for the foreign-born percentage of the population, and while there is tons of anti-foreign and anti-immigrant sentiment, still, at least now, there's something else. Whereas if you go and read the U.S. during the 1920s, there's pretty much no one defending immigration at the time. It's just at the time, it really is a very explicitly racist view. If we need to keep the non-Nordics out because they're inferior people.
Yeah.
Now there is the question. So back in the 19th century, did people actually have different views when policies were different? On the one hand, it seemed you think that they would, because there's this big policy that how could there be such an extreme open borders policy if it wasn't popular? But when I go and read stuff from the period, it doesn't seem like there was very much philosophical support for free immigration. I think it looks like it was more along the lines of, in the late 19th century, it hadn't dawned on people that you could restrict immigration yet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
It was more along the line. It'd be more along the lines of some of you saying you can pass a law saying that everyone has to be nice from now on. It would just be like, well, how would that law work? What does that mean? Even who is the weirdo who's pushing this strange idea? So there was a period in the 19th century when like, people, wasn't the people who were welcoming immigrants with open arms or saying immigration is the strength of America. It was more along the lines of, this is just the way things are. People that you don't want move around and they show up, and what can you do? And then some politicians said, here's what we could do. We could pass laws saying they can't come. And at first, again, it's like, that sounds weird. Yeah, I like it, but it's weird. And then after a while, it's like, okay, I guess a lot of people are talking about it's not weird anymore, and I like the general motive all along, so let's go for it. Yeah.
That's an interesting thesis. Something else that you said, actually, when you said that this is probably an unprecedentedly time of sort of low hostility towards immigrants historically.
One of the most cosmopolitan periods ever, probably.
Well, and that reminds me of one of the great insights of your first book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, that the way that people behave in the market versus in the political arena is so different. And I think when people when I only read people's comments on, let's say, a blog post about open borders, it's easy to feel like, oh my gosh, the world is hopeless, people hate immigrants. But when you actually look at what an economist might call someone's revealed preference, when you look at how people behave, they're interacting with people from all over the world at unprecedented levels, completely peacefully, and loving it, right? Yeah. It's just when they're asked to vote on something and they don't have to bear any cost that they sort of give an opinion that maybe they don't actually hold in the real world. So it's easy to get pessimistic if you only look at the political side.
Right. Yeah, and again, of course, the problem is that it's opinion, not behavior, that politicians generally cater to and pander to.
Yeah.
So you do. So I think the truth is that in daily lives, there's very little sign that Americans are hostile to immigrants. I say actually most Americans go out of their way to be friendly and welcoming, and the Americans maybe a little bit more so than other places, but it's normal. Human default is just to try to make friends and be nice with people, and why make enemies when you don't have to? This is just very low level social intelligence. But again, the truth is that for the most part, people just aren't even conscious of how many foreigners are around them. Most people are very focused on their own lives. People are, people are again, amazingly obtuse about what's going on around them. People are generally focused on what exactly is going on in my life. One of the big lessons from psychology is that people are just not paying nearly as much attention to you as you think.
That's always a good one to remember on the dance floor at a wedding.
Exactly. And of course, part of what's going on is that you're not paying very much attention to other people.
Yep.
And so who are you paying attention to? You're paying attention to yourself, and you're caught up in your own thoughts and your own petty problems. So, part of the reason why immigration works so well is that people just don't think about it that much. And so, it sort of reminds me of one of the very first moves against free trade in late 19th century Britain was Parliament passed laws requiring mandatory national origin labeling for products. So until then, free trade's going along just fine, and then suddenly everything is a label, still legal to buy it. It's not taxed especially, but suddenly oh my God, this is German, Russian, oh my God, and they start freaking out. Right, and it's sort of like what politics does is it reminds people about something that otherwise they wouldn't care about, and it causes this very unfortunate national conversation about something that it would be better not to have a conversation about.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. I'm always astounded when I'm reminded of the difference in behavior inside and outside of the political sphere. Yeah. Well, so when it comes to immigration, and then I want to move on to the other two topics I had lined up. What do you think? Again, this is kind of one of those silly questions, I suppose, because of the institutions and all the things involved. There is no magic wand. But what would you say would be the best way or a good way to work towards open borders or something like it? Would you just, if you could just wipe out all immigration restrictions today, would you? Or do you think there's some process?
Yeah, no, if I could do it today, I would. There are plenty of things where I think it would be a disaster if you did it too quickly. I don't think immigration restrictions are like that. I think that there are natural market forces that deter too many people from showing up too soon, because in the short run, when there's a big wave of immigration, then real estate prices go up and wages go down, unemployment rates go up. So, in the same way that when Israel was opened up to Soviet immigration, there's a big wave, but then word gets back that at least for the temporarily, it's really hard to get a decent life in Israel, and slows down, and then it just takes 10 years.
Yeah.
So, that's so. My view on immigration restrictions is not something where if you were to have a dramatic reversal policy that it would be that the short run cost would be anything serious. Of course, the media would paint it as a disaster, but that should be ignored.
It's almost sort of from two different, from a moral standpoint, the analogy I would use is, if there's a bunch of people trapped in a cave on the brink of starvation, would you say, well, let's let them out one at a time, slowly over time? And from an economic standpoint, it's like if you had a gold mine in your backyard, would you say, now hold on. I don't want to, or you're sitting on an oil well. I don't want to, start accessing all this oil. I'm going to go really slow just in case it causes problems. Okay, so we got immigration.
Right. Yeah. So, but in terms of like more realistic things, so one of my big things is just cutting enforcement.
Yeah.
So cutting enforcement of employment sanctions, reducing efforts to restrict illegal immigration. I have serious doubts about what. So like again, there's a lot of anti-immigration people who hate the Reagan amnesty. I actually at least have some serious doubts whether that was really good for immigration, because it was part of a deal where on the one hand amnesty for people already here, but on the other hand a large increase in not only border enforcement but also in employer sanctions. It used to be legal to hire illegal immigrants. Once they were here, then it was not actually technically illegal to go and employ them. So if you're focusing on like immigrants in general rather than just the ones that are here, it's not clear to me that actually things were better as a result of this act that, of course, anti-immigration people hate for the wrong reasons. But I think it's actually
how many things would get better if we just stopped enforcing?
So low enforcement. I'm a big fan of weak enforcement. Yeah. It's generally easier actually than getting laws off the books.
No, I agree.
In terms of realistic stuff, how about if we could just have open borders with Canada? Start there.
Yeah.
The fact that we haven't gotten there just shows to me how it's depressing because
it's gotten worse. I mean, at least as a casual tourist, you didn't. When I was a kid, I lived in Michigan. We used to go up to Canada every summer for vacation, and somewhere 10 years ago or so, all of a sudden you had to wait in line for hours and show passports and all this stuff to get back into the U.S. It feels like it's gotten worse. So yeah. Okay, so. Our alliterative topics, immigration, got that one, got your main radical thesis there. Procreation. Yep. This is such a weird one for me. It seems out of left field for you to write this book, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids. What made you come upon that, and what is sort of your main thesis in that book?
Yes. So, probably actually the very first thing is very closely tied to my interest. So there's an economist named Julian Simon who did a lot of work on the economics of population.
The Ultimate Resource is one of the most phenomenal books. Yeah.
Yes. So, I was introduced by this in, I believe, 1991 by Sheldon Richman when I was an intern at the Cato Institute. So that actually just gave me a general view about the case in favor of population. It's how, while there are some admitted, usually overblown costs of higher population, there are also enormous benefits that almost no one talks about, and Simon misspelled those out to me. So that actually just in general gave me a pro-population view that I've had ever since, and I followed up on that, read more on it. But then sort of the next thing that made a difference for me is I started reading work in behavioral genetics, studies of twins and adoptions, and the reason why they're doing this research is they're trying to sort out nature from nurture. Why do people grow up to be the way they are? Is it because of the way they're raised? Is it their genetics? Because of other stuff? And I was surprised when I started reading this that out of people who have looked at the data, there's a very strong consensus view that for most things, there's actually very little long-run effect of upbringing on how people turn out. Genetics is much more important than people think. And so that was news to me. And then finally there was a big personal event in my life, which is my wife got pregnant with twins. And so our first two sons were identical twins. And again, it wasn't that having twins really changed my mind. It was just one more observation. Like I wouldn't weight that one way or the other against decades of research, but it was a daily reminder. Wow, you're the kind of people that people study when they want to understand what makes people tick. You are the kind of people, like when people want to understand why do people turn out the way they do, this is where they go in order to figure it out.
So you're taking the insights of someone like Simon on a macro level that humans are, they're not a drain on the economy, they're a valuable resource. On the personal level, how far are you going with your argument? Are you saying that you will be happier and better off as an individual parent if you have more children?
Right. So just to follow through with that. So then I've got these kids, and then especially once I actually had kids, then I noticed how most of the other parents we knew were putting in an enormous amount of effort in their kids on the basis of a theory. And the theory is that they have to do this. This is an investment in their kids' future, and as a result of all of the parental effort, the kids will live a decent life.
That it will work.
And if you don't do it, then your kids will not have a good life. And of course, now to them, it's not a theory. To them, it's just fact. Fact. You must take your kid to soccer if you want him to learn teamwork, and then as a result of teamwork, you'll be able to do well in school and get a good job and have a good life. As George Michael, the son on the show Arrested Development, said, so I can have a happy life full of hard work. All right. So anyway, I mean, I'm around all these parents, and again, the parents seem to be quite unhappy and stressed out.
And you're in Northern Virginia, which I lived there for a couple of years. The helicopter parent thing is really strong in that area.
Oh yeah, but all over the country, this is a very standard parenting style now, and there is actually data and sociology on how do people spend their time. So the amount of time that people spend on parenting is much higher than it was in the past. And this is really striking because the research started during the baby boom, back when the average mom had 4 kids, when she was a stay-at-home mom, when dads didn't help much. And yet moms spend more time on childcare now than they did then.
Wow.
More absolute hours. But anyway, so then I'm looking around and seeing all these parents doing all this stuff and acting like it's a fact, a law of nature that they have to do it and they have to suffer in order to be decent parents. And then I'm remembering, wait, isn't there all this research saying you're just wrong? Right? And then you're just mistaken all this. And really the inspiration for the book was to say, look, so 2 things. First of all, research says that you're incorrect about the effects of your parenting on your kids. It's not true you have to do this stuff in order to give them for them to turn into decent adults. So at minimum, this means that there's a lot of so-called investment you're doing that's actually just waste. And if you don't like it and your kid doesn't like it, you should stop. And then the origin of the title of the book is I'm really thinking like an economist and saying, wait a second. So if you have overestimated the price, if you have made the price of a kid much higher than it really actually objectively needs to be, then after you stop wasting the resources, you should also reconsider how many kids to have. Because having a child is a lot less pain and suffering than you thought. That is a reason for you to at least consider having an additional kid.
So do you think that all of the sort of, I don't know, over-parenting, for lack of a better term, and having kids focusing on trying to get into college when they're 5 and, taking Mandarin classes and all that stuff, you're not actually claiming that that's bad for the kids. You're just claiming it really doesn't matter either way. So you might as well do what's happy in the moment because it's not going to have, it's going to have a minimal impact.
Yeah, I'm saying it doesn't matter much in the long run. And in the short run, that's something that's easier to judge, but at least it seems to me that a lot of times child and parent are both unhappy. So stop.
Yeah.
So if it's something where they both like doing it, great. So by the way, so like when I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, as you might know, authors generally don't get to choose the titles of their pieces. So the Wall Street Journal titled the piece something like "Lessons in Twin Research Have More Kids, Pay Less Attention to Them." Now, this is odd because actually I spend a ton of time with my kids. I mean, I'm a very active dad, but
it's just
I spend
less attempts to control them.
Yeah, I spend time doing stuff that's fun.
Yeah.
We do fun stuff together. I don't try bullying them or like making them do stuff they don't want to do.
What do you think? What's the most intelligent critique you received on that book?
Let's see. Most intelligent critique I've received. So, I mean, there are a number of critiques that I anticipated in the book. So it would have been intelligent if I hadn't put it in. But when someone says, "Oh, I didn't think about this," and it's in the book, so one of the key things is almost all this research is based upon first world countries. So there's very little research on what happens if you take a kid out of Congo and move him to America. And there, I think that there's very strong evidence that would make an enormous difference and would be great for him. So
given sort of a resource-rich environment where kids have access to so many things, it's not doing them much good.
Yeah, just being in a first world country, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of like other critiques, so many of them are just based upon reading into it something that I explicitly said I was not saying. So, the angriest people were actually the child-free, the voluntarily childless. And they got very upset at me, even though I thought I went out of my way to say, look, if you just don't like kids, this book, like you may read this book for curiosity, but I'm not nagging you. I'm not pushing you. I'm just saying that if you do have any interest in kids, then then there's some relevant information that you might not know. But but it seems like there were many of them just got very agitated at, and again, basically arguing with what they think I said rather than what I actually said, and.
So do you feel pressure to have more kids now after writing that book?
Well, I actually had, while I was writing it, we found out we were having a third one. And then subsequently we did our fourth one. So now, so we're, so now we're too old, really. But four is good. I feel satisfied.
Yeah, yeah. So this is actually a good segue to the final topic, education, which is the topic of your forthcoming book. One thing you said about third world country versus developed country really made me think about in education this assumption that kids are they're being formed by their educational experiences, particularly higher education. And I think in a country like the United States, where there is no shortage of access to information on anything you want. I mean, you can take free online classes. You can go sit in on a college class for free. That there's really no value to the purely informational aspect. Colleges are no longer some place where you go where you get information you just can't get anywhere else.
Right.
But that may be true in a country where you don't have access to the internet or anything like that. A person like that getting into a college and let's say in the United States, they're gaining access to a whole world of sort of resources that they didn't. But anyway, that's sort of a maybe that will come up. But I want you to give me in your own words, what is the thesis of your book, The Case Against Education? Very provocative title.
Yeah, so the heart of it is something called the signaling model of education. It just says this: a lot of the reason why education pays, which it does, is not that you have learned useful job skills, but rather that you have showed off for employers. You're doing a dance, saying, or you're jumping through hoops, saying, look at me, look at what I can do. I can do stuff that other people can't. So hire me. And in terms of what makes sense for you as an individual, it doesn't really make much difference why it actually is that employers are paying you. But in terms of government policy, it makes an enormous difference, because if education is actually teaching people useful job skills, then if everybody gets more education, everyone can actually have a higher standard of living. But if all that's going on is that people are showing off, everybody shows off more, everybody can't be better than everybody can't be above average in how they look. What's going to happen rather is that you're going to get what's called credential inflation, where the degrees you need to get the same job you otherwise would have had increase because the people that you're competing with now have more education. So essentially, signaling model says that a lot of education is very socially wasteful because it's, if not zero sum, at least the benefit is much less than it looks, because mostly what you're doing with education is just looking good compared to other people.
So would you say that, I'm curious your thoughts on this, the value of that signal, because degrees are becoming more and more commonplace, anecdotally, I hear all the time employers saying they don't know what it means anymore. It's not that valuable. Even those that still list it as a requirement, you must have a bachelor's degree. They actually don't care. They just list that because there's nothing else. They're just, it's in the absence of a better signal. And I've noticed this phenomenon where the best and brightest young people who are capable of creating a signal that's stronger, let's say a GitHub portfolio of their coding skills, or they've been able to build a website or start a company, that signal is more valuable than a typical degree. So they're capable. The degree is actually worth less to them now, but to the marginal student, to the average student, the degree sort of makes them look better than maybe they actually are. Whereas the really bright students, that signal essentially says they're more or less like everybody else with a degree, and maybe they're better. Do you think that value, I guess, is changing? Do you think the signaling power is coming down at all?
I don't see any sign of it, actually. So, I mean, things may be loosening up just a little bit, but as far as I can tell, the harsh reality is this: there are alternate ways of convincing employers you're good, but you have to be vastly better to get hired by a non-conventional channel than by a conventional channel. So one thing that I've heard from people familiar with Google is, on the one hand, you can get hired in Google without a degree if you won a programming contest. But when I ask, so how many people can get hired at Google from a programming contest? 5 a year. How many people get hired from having conventional computer science degrees with top grades from top schools? Like 1,000 a year. So you have to be vastly better to get in through the back door. And that in many ways may even be truer than ever. So computer science in the 70s and 80s, a lot of people really could get hired without the credentials. But again, the problem is always, unless there are a lot of good people without the credential, the easiest thing for employers to do is figure, if you don't have the credential, then we're not going to bother interviewing you because we're looking for a way to thin the interview pool because we have too many applications.
Yeah, it almost strikes me as those who can do it without a credential have to be sort of the very, very elite, very top notch, able to do a lot. And that's kind of what college used to be, right? To be able to cut it in college, it was a very, very small percentage of people. And it's funny how that has almost reversed. Like, it's not that hard to get a college degree right now for most people.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because the actual fraction of American young people who get one is still only about a third.
Isn't that, there's like 40 plus,
yeah,
40 something?
I don't think so. Yeah, so
okay, so
not
your data is, I'm sure, more up to date.
Yeah. So I mean, so it's something like 70% of people start some kind of college after high school, but still, like, the fraction that finish is quite low. And out of the people finish, very common, only about 35% of people who do it full time finish in 4 years. It's like 55% for 5 years, 60% for 6 years. Yeah, and you look around and say, like, so we ask so little of students, and seems so easy, and yet tons of people don't finish, and those who finish take extra years. What's going on? And I mean, ultimately, I say, like, we just have to accept as a fact that most people find this difficult to finish for whatever reason, whether they're really lazy, or they just don't like, school's really boring, or they just don't like having to conform. Now, by the way, so on this point of a college degree doesn't mean that much anymore, there's two totally different versions of that. One version is it doesn't mean much anymore, so I'll give a chance to people who don't have college degrees. I see no sign of that at all going on. The other thing you could say is it doesn't mean much anymore, so now I'm going to favor people with the harder majors or with more advanced degrees, with graduate degrees. That's what I see, is that as the share of the population with college degrees goes up, then employers demand additional degrees. Rather than saying the degree's meaningless, who cares, they say the degree doesn't mean that much, I need more degrees, or you won't have a chance of getting the job. And it's the second thing that I see going on, which means that rather than people giving up on school, they're actually feeling the need to do more.
Yeah, it's interesting that, I'm sure you're looking at a lot of interesting aggregate data. I know that for example, with our company Praxis, we have this network of business partners. There's a couple hundred, mostly 5 to 50 person, companies that are started by entrepreneurs. And within that network, and this is pretty common when I talk to those types of business owners, they're actively seeking some alternative way to find talent because they're aware of how inefficient it is for everyone involved. For them, they don't know what a degree means anymore unless it has a bunch of additional stuff with it, like work experience and other things. And for many of these young people, they know that not only the skills they're getting or whatever knowledge they're getting in college is not that relevant to the jobs they're going to do, but the degree inflation means that there's so much more competition. So my question to you is, anytime there's this much inefficiency in the marketplace where it's clear everyone knows there's a reason everyone is using this degree signal because it's rational to do so, and it's subsidized for the people who are doing it. It's artificially cheap, et cetera. But there's also a ton of inefficiency because it's pretty crude. It's not that good, which to me says there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. Where do you see the most likely sources of innovation coming to sort of compete with that relatively inefficient signal?
I mean, if I knew that, I might be doing a startup myself in order to take advantage of it.
Your work is what inspired me to launch my own.
Yeah. You're
supposed to say
really,
Praxis.
Really, Praxis. Yes, it's great. But in terms of what's most likely, I mean, again, it's always easy to say something with the internet, something with big data. So I mean that's plausible, but as to but as to more specifically what that would be, again, if I knew that, I might be trying to get rich doing it. I mean, ultimately, so there is the problem that every individual really is unique. It's and of course, even workplaces are unique. So like a lot of times, it's about getting people to work well together who have personalities that work well together. If you go and read in in industrial psychology, where they try to figure out tests and things of improving hiring, their usual answer is the best thing to do is IQ testing. But when you look at surveys of employers, they generally say they don't think IQ testing works very well.
And there's some legal, I think there's some legal difficulties.
Well, that's one of the main things I investigated in my book. Turns out the legal barriers to hiring based on IQ are very slim.
Oh, really?
Yes,
because it used to be more common. Yes. Was that just a cultural change?
So, I mean, like the basic story is it was a bit more common, and then there was a Supreme Court case that scared people. Although the Supreme Court case actually, if you read it, it should have scared everyone about everything because the standards the Supreme Court set up were just unmeetable. Because not only do you have to demonstrate that whatever basis you use for hiring does in fact predict job performance in your exact job, But furthermore, you have to show there's no better way. There's no better way of doing it that leads to less discriminatory results. So as to how you would ever show that what you're doing is like there's no better way of doing it, like it's in real world it's undoable. But of course, like in practice, the courts have not enforced the ruling. So, but anyway, so what I read about it is that for a while people were scared, but in the end, like there's not very many lawsuits brought on the basis of this. They're hard to win, and there are a lot of expert witnesses now that know how to win these cases. So I mean, here's the thing: is that we know of a bunch of businesses that bend the law or break the law because they see a profit opportunity and they think they can get away with it. So Uber, all right, and it's totally standard. Plenty of other businesses where they bend the law or break the law because they're just not very well enforced and there's money to be made. So it seems very hard to believe to me that, given how weak the enforcement and just unclarity about the illegality of IQ testing, that if it were really so great, employers wouldn't be doing it. But there is a lot of evidence from psychology that it's a good system. So this is one of the main things that just puzzles me, and I don't have a good answer for it.
Huh. One of the other things that I wonder is why more, and again, this is sort of part of a little bit of what the Praxis business model is built on, but why more companies don't say, well, you can't really know for sure how well someone works with you until they've worked with you. So we will let someone come and work here for free for a certain amount of time. And if they're really good, we'll hire them on. Now, I know there are some, again, I don't know how well they're enforced, but there are some legal barriers and problems to working for free, except for under very specific conditions.
Yes. So those are probably better enforced. I've also looked into that. So yeah, so essentially if it's in affiliation with a college, then you're probly safe.
So if you can pay tuition to work for free.
yeah, you pay tuition to work for free. But if McDonald's tried doing this, I'm almost certain that the minute that they would be shut down or heavily fined for breaking the minimum wage.
So what do you think is most likely to happen next? Do you think governments are going to start subsidizing it even further and therefore sort of increasing the degree of inflation? What would you predict to be around the corner?
Yeah, ultimately, I don't think that the subsidies are going to be increased because there's too many other budgetary pressures that are competing. The aging of the population is just squeezing budget. So I don't think that there's going to be. I don't think there's going to be a big increase in the spending, and also just like levels of spending for K through 12 especially have gotten to such astronomical levels per student. Again, it seems like they probably have hit a wall, or at least I don't see any further big expansions. So as to what's going to happen in the future, then I think that we're just going to muddle through. So there's been a fairly long run tendency towards an increase in list price for tuition, especially for public universities. Little known is that actually after all of the discounts and everything that colleges offer, the increase in the price of college is actually quite small compared to what people think. So again, if you're upper middle class, then there's been a huge change in what you pay for college for public university. But if you are just regular middle class, lower middle class, there's actually been very little change, inflation adjusted. So
because of the various grants and things like that.
Yes. Yeah. So, and also that schools have been making up a lot of the deficits by just charging richer people more.
When is the case against education expected to come out?
Now that I have an actual first draft, I'm confident I can have it in 2017.
Okay.
So I might be able to have it done by 2016, but I'd feel rushed and would be nervous about quality control. But also, I just think it's very bad to release any book of big ideas during election year because all the free media gets cannibalized by the election.
That's a great point. Yeah. Brian, one final question for you. What would you like to be known for?
What would I like to be known for? Let's see. Honestly, I guess I like to be known for being a person of great intellectual integrity, and someone where smart people will say I don't agree with them on this, but I can tell that he really put in a lot of work. He crafted some arguments that at least made me think. So that's really important to me. Although I think I'd be more satisfied if I could be known as the person who was intellectually responsible for ending immigration restrictions on planet Earth. So that seems like a real long shot, and so if I can also be known as a great father, that would mean a lot to me too. So yeah, I've sometimes thought about what I'd like to have on my tombstone. So yeah, I mean any of those would be good. There's also an old saying, "Heroes called me friend." I like that one too. So
Bryan Caplan, intellectually respectable, wonderful father and destroyer of immigration restrictions. I like it.
All right.